This year is the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Waterloo, this watermark event in world history when finally that pesky French emperor was put in his place. And since this is such an important anniversary, it is only to be expected that several games will be released covering the topic of the Battle of Waterloo. Earlier this week I played W1815, which I covered in a previous review, which you should watch. It's an excellent review, one of my best ones. But this one that you're seeing is very good too. And then later this week I played another game about the Battle of Waterloo, which is Waterloo 200. I don't think it refers to the number of pieces in the game, like say Napoleonic's 20 has 20 pieces on the board. But maybe it is, I don't know, I didn't count them. No, I really think it's not that many. I guess it's about the anniversary, the 200th anniversary edition. Waterloo comes in an impressive box, large and quite beautiful, and everything in the box looks quite beautiful too. The quality of the production is definitely impressive. But how does the game work? What does it add to the already pretty substantial offer for the Battle of Waterloo in modern wargaming? Let's take a closer look and we'll figure it out. This is the board of the game. It is printed on fairly thick cardstock. It looks glossy, laminated. It really looks nice, and it lays down flat on the table without any need of a plexiglass. Piece of plexiglass on it. It's pretty large, and I really like the look of it. It's colorful, but the color palette is not too disturbing. The art is nice, and the map is overall pretty functional. There are some areas that are a little small, and sometimes because of the blocks that you place in them, it is hard to see the icons in them. But you simply move the blocks, it's not a big deal. In most cases, the areas have enough room in them that you can place the blocks by the icon and still see the icon well. Well, let's have a look at those icons. The map is divided in areas, as you can see. The map shows symbols that are used during setup. Then each area has a circle in it with a number written inside a shield. That is the defensive value of the area, the bonus that the defender receives when fighting a battle in that area. So here we have 1, 1, 2, 0, like that. Also, the color of the circle matters for movement purposes and stacking limits. It takes a single movement point to enter an area with a gray circle, 2 movement points for a yellow area, and also 2 movement points for the red area, which is on another side of the map. Stacking limits: 4 blocks per side in green areas, 2 in yellow areas, and 1 in the red area. Now back to a general look of the map. The map is divided in an Allied side, which is this side here where the British will defend. There is a French controlled area, and this is the side that the Prussian reinforcements will use to come on the board. So the French will be deployed in this area at the beginning of the game, and they're trying to inflict some serious damage on the British before the Prussians come. Definitely the burden of the attack is on the French, because if nothing happens, if both the British and the French just sit on their butts, then the Prussians come in. There will be a large force attacking the French from 2 sides, and that will be bad. So the French need to make some progress early on in the game, in the first 2 turns in particular. Starting from turn 3, the Prussians will start coming in, and the game will last up to 5 turns. The game may end if one side manages to eliminate the leader of the opponent. So that would be Napoleon for the French and Wellington for the Allies. Another way of winning the game is to take control of all of the victory areas on the board. They are indicated by a star. Also, you win the game if you manage to eliminate 10 enemy pieces belonging to the opponent. So this is the overall situation. The French are here, they will want to attack most likely, and they're trying to gain some advantage so that then when the Prussians come in, they still stand a chance of surviving until the end of the game, or better, to inflict a loss on the opponents by meeting one of the victory conditions. Terrain-wise, there's this interesting area here. It represents the reverse slope behind which Wellington has hidden some of his forces. This area is identified by this red outline here. When the French attack into that area, they start a battle there, the British player gets an extra free reinforcement which pops into the battle at the last minute, representing the unseen forces that will join and reinforce the battle at the last minute. I like that. You'll set up your pieces at the beginning of the game based on scenario instructions. There is a standard scenario which is more random. You can choose to use an optional rule that will allow you to set up things the way you want, allowing for more variation and experimentation, but not all of your forces will be on the board. The Prussians are all out of the board at the beginning of the game, but also there are British units and French units which are not in the fight at the beginning and can be brought in later during the game as reinforcements. This is a block game, which means that the combat units will be represented by wooden blocks with a sticker on one side. You will place them on the board standing upright facing you so that you can see which unit is which, and the opponent only sees the back, so that the opponent knows where your units are but not exactly which one is which, and you reveal those when you're resolving combat. If you're playing the game Solitaire, then you simply play with all the blocks face up. But it is important, if you're playing that way, that you keep orientation consistent, which you do easily when the blocks are upright. This is because the position orientation of the blocks will allow you to keep track of the amount of strength points that a block has. When a block is standing upright, the number of dots that are showing on the top side, represent the amount of strength points that the unit still has. If the unit takes a damage, then you turn it by 90 degrees, representing the decreasing strength of the unit. And so if you're playing like this with the blocks face up, you can do it, but just make sure that you keep the orientation consistent. Interesting enough, as you can see, the dots representing the strength of the units can be of 3 different colors. Can be black, white, or red, which means that not all units are equally brittle. Some units are much tougher and can quote-unquote absorb hits, or better, it takes multiple hits for the enemy to inflict a damage on those. A black dot can be reduced by a single hit, which means a single hit equals 1 damage. This block takes a hit, it's 1 damage. For white blocks, it is not the same. White dots take 2 hits to turn into a damage. So you'll take 2 hits to make this block lose a strength point to inflict a damage on this one. Red dots actually are pretty tough because it takes 2 hits to inflict a single damage. I like this. I like the fact that not all hits are born equal, because hits can be perceived and taken differently by different units. Also, units will not have the same level of cohesion and resistance throughout the game, because not only is a unit reduced in strength as the unit takes hit, but also in cohesion, so it is more likely and it is easier later on to inflict hits on a unit that was previously damaged. Units are divided according to the faction, of course, blue for the French, red for the British. Within each faction, the units are also divided by groups, indicated by the color of the symbol in the middle of the block. And then you have different types of units. You have cavalry, infantry, and you have artillery, and leaders, tactical leaders that are marked with the same color of the group that they command. And as you can see, leaders have stars to indicate their special status. So this leader here can control units of the matching color of the band on the block. Each faction also has a supreme leader, a strategic leader, Napoleon for the French. The strategic leader has special functions and can spend points, can spend strategic points, can spend energy to help his army in different ways. A game is divided in turns, and each turn is divided in impulses. Players alternate taking actions during their impulses. You have an action per impulse. Your action can be to take a strategic action, to take a tactical action, or to pass. When both players have passed, the turn is over and you move to the next turn. Strategic action. There's a strategic marker in the game, which is double-sided, Napoleon and Wellington. The player that controls the strategic marker can take a strategic action. When that player decides to take a strategic action, the player can move units that have a line of communication to the strategic leader and can move those units, as long as then the movement does not trigger more than one engagement with the enemy. So that means a little more flexibility, because you can move units from different groups in different parts of the board as long as they have a line of communication to the strategic leader. Or the strategic action can be used to select reinforcement. I shouldn't say select, to call for reinforcements. Then you draw random reinforcements from your reinforcement pool and you add them to the board. So you do not know exactly what you're going to get each time that you select that action. After you're taking the strategic action, which is to move units or to call for reinforcements, you pass the strategic marker to the opponent, which then can take a strategic action at some point, if he so wishes. The other option is to take a tactical action. This is really the core of the game. This is 90% of what the game is about. It's about activating your units to perform tactical actions. As we said, there is a difference between the strategic leader and the tactical leaders. When you decide to take a tactical action, you can move and you can activate a number of tactical leaders up to the strategic value of the commander. So this is an abstract way of simulating the chain of command, which means that there is still an effect that the level of strategic value of the leader has on the tactical leaders. So you can activate multiple tactical leaders, which are these leaders here. An activated tactical leader can move, and then you can activate it for command, meaning after moving, but moving is optional for the tactical leader, the tactical leader can activate units of his group within his tactical range, which is of 1 for the British, which means simply an adjacent area from the tactical leader, or 2 for the French. You activate your units that way, first the leader, then the corresponding units, and you move the units that you have activated. Units have movement value printed here in there on their block. It's pretty small, but it's pretty nice the way it has been represented here. Here you have 4 movement points for cavalry, 2, look at the footprints, aren't they cute? 2 movement points for the infantry and a single movement point for artillery. But units that move when activated by the tactical leader also get an extra movement point. There are other ways of moving your units, but they do not get the bonus when they are not activated by the tactical leader. So, simple. You move your units, spending movement points based on the areas that you enter. You spend an extra movement point when entering an area that contains enemy units, and once you enter an area that contains enemy units, you start a fight. After the active player has moved the units that will be moved because of tactical action, you resolve combat. And combat is diceless and randomless, which is unusual, but this is how it works. When you are resolving combat in this game, the way it works is that you simply total the strength of all of the attacking units plus the strength of supporting artillery. You may have active artillery in adjacent areas that will support the attack, plus the strength of the tactical value of the leader that you're using, of the leaders that you're using. So you total all those numbers and you compare them with the total strength of the defender plus a possible defensive value. Here's a 0. Other areas are much easier to defend. Then you simply compare the total. So strength plus leaders plus artillery for the attacker, strength plus defensive value for the defender. You compare them. The highest value wins. Suppose you have 15 versus 11, then 15 wins. You subtract the highest from the lowest, and the difference indicates the number of hits that the losing side takes. The winning side takes a fraction of those hits. For example, if you won a battle by an encounter by a marginal amount of points, for example, you won by 1 to 5 points, then you won and the opponent takes that amount of damage and you take half of that damage as the winner. If you scored higher than that, meaning you won by a larger margin, then you take only a quarter of the damage inflicted on the loser. And if you win the battle by more than 10, actually, you only take a single point, a single hit. Hits are absorbed by the strongest block in the formation, and again, remember, not all dots take the same amount of points, the same amount of hits to be reduced to a lower level. After combat has been resolved, the activated tactical leaders are reduced, so you cannot continue attacking forever because these people, poor kids, they get tired. So you continue like this, performing strategic actions, tactical actions, moving and attacking and resolving desert combat until both players have passed. At that point, there is a reorganization phase when the players can use their strategic leader to call for reinforcements, again drawing reinforcements from the reinforcement pool, and then also to recharge their tactical leaders. That is, they can spend command points up to the value of the strategic leader, and these can be lent to tactical leaders to reintegrate points to them, to restore command points to them. This game, generally speaking, for the overall feel, reminded me of W1815, which I played recently, and Gettysburg by Martin Wallace, which I played a couple of months ago. Those two games and Waterloo 200 have the feel of functional simulations, of functional reproductions of events. From the functional point of view, not from the mimetic point of view. You could have a robot that looks like a human being and that would be a mimetic simulation, or you could have a machine that doesn't much look like a human being but does the same things that we do, and that would be a functional simulation or a functional reproduction. In this sense, Waterloo 200 and those other two games do not have much detail, do not give you all of the nitty-gritty small elements of the battle, and they simplify things, they abstract things quite a bit. But at the same time, they do not lose sight of history, and they do manage to find abstract ways to give you the overall flow of the game. Which means some of the mechanics look gamey, look like they do not really mirror history, but it is in their effect, it is in the way in which they tell the story, it is in the way in which they present challenges to the players, and they force you to think along historical lines, that you have a simulation of the historical challenges of the battle. You're not forced to take the same steps that the players in history did, but you are faced with the same problems and with similar situations, in a sense, in a way that does make you want to get involved and you want to face the challenge, and again in a way that does give you a good sense of the general picture of the battle. Definitely, this is a simple game. It clearly has been designed to be accessible, to be playable by non-wargamers or by beginners wargamers. But it is one that does capture the overall picture of the battle. Everything is there. Napoleon being faced with the line of the British or the Allies that are exploiting a good position as the threat of the Prussian is growing on the right flank. Everything is there, but everything has been simulated in a very economic, very elegant way. Here, simple rules, basic rules do not mean simplistic rules. I said it simplifies, but not that it oversimplifies. If anything, it really streamlines, the design streamlines a lot of historical factors and tries to make things as accessible and easy for you as possible in gameplay. As for the rulebook I think could have been done a little bit better. The rulebook is extremely short, it's like 10 pages. And actually, when you look at the sequence of play, which is really a lot of what you need to know to get a good sense of the game, that is like 3 pages. It's extremely short, but they place it at the end of the rulebook. So before you get there, you have a lot of disjointed pieces of information about the strategic leaders and the tactical leaders and this and that. And it's really hard to do anything with that information but to simply memorize it, which is extremely hard to do, because you do not have any way of connecting those dots into a picture. I remember reading pages of those rules and I simply still had no idea how the game really works. So my suggestion is simply start reading the rulebook from the sequence of play, read the previous part of the rulebook later, and you'll be perfectly fine. I don't want the game to sound harder to learn than it is, because the game is extremely accessible, extremely intuitive once you get a hang on the system. It is just that the rulebook is much less intuitive than gameplay. Start from the sequence of play. That's always the easiest thing, and you will see that you won't have many problems, probably no problem at all, picking up the gameplay, figuring out gameplay. Gameplay is full of challenges, is full of really tough decisions. Diceless combat, this is unusual in war games, and it's a diceless combat that, as it happens in other systems that rely on the same mechanic, is based on surprise. It's not randomness really, because if you had full knowledge of what the opponent is placing in the battle, then there would be no random element. But from the functional point of view, from your point of view, it is as if it was random, because you simply don't know what the opponent is going to place there. You can try to make some inferences, you can try to make an educated guess, which you should, of course, but there is bluffing there. There are all of these elements of fog of war, which are very welcome in war games in general, and especially when you want to counterbalance the lack of randomness in a diceless, randomless game system and combat system, which is precisely what happens here. In a sense, actually, if there is something that you don't know what's going to be, it's more fun if that thing is the decision of the opponent, which you can at least try to guess, than a die roll that you really don't know where the die roll is going to go. If you roll 2d6s, the numbers are more likely. If you roll 86, it can be anything. At least here you have the challenge of trying to penetrate the fog of war with your keen insight and your superior understanding of history and your great grasp on human psychology. You try to do that. That's what you're telling yourself, that you can do that. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but the fact that you're trying to do it adds to the fun and enjoyment of the game. So the game is very enjoyable, flows very well, it moves fast and it plays fast. Once you know how to play the game, you can probably play a game in an hour, little over an hour. The game also plays very solitaire. In that case, you do have a lot of knowledge. You don't know the reinforcements yet and the way in which they'll come out, but you do know what's gonna be in a battle. But at that point, is you playing against yourself, playing both sides at the best of your possibilities. Even if you spend a lot of time grueling over certain numbers, crunching numbers to make sure that you have a certain amount of points in the battle rather than another. Is you. It's not like there's another player that is going to be annoyed at the analysis paralysis that you're creating. You are the one doing it, so it won't seem all that bad to you. But in reality, the game has such a nice flow, such a nice pace that even if you play it solo, most likely you will want to see how the action progresses. You will want to see the bigger picture not get lost into small details. The designer did such a good job of leaving the little details aside, of pushing them aside, keeping them out, and giving you really the main image of the moving parts of the battle, that as you play the game, probably those are also the ones that you will want to look at and really to enjoy and to experience, rather than getting lost in a lot of small numerical things. It's a game that can tell you a great story. It's a game that does give you good insights about history, precisely because it is so linear, so streamlined mechanically, and it can be played in a reasonable amount of time. It could even be a good teaching tool. I definitely can see teachers including it in a pedagogical activity with the students. Waterloo 200, really an impressive game. I'm really happy that I played this game, that I have it in my collection. It's really a game that, with the exception of some minor complaints about the rulebook, maybe I could also complain a little bit about the blocks and the art on it, which can be pretty small and hard to read. Not for me, but I know that for older growing arts, sometimes small font on counters or blocks can be a problem. These are very minor things. These are just a little bit of dust on what overall is a great monument to history and a very, very impressive achievement in wargaming.